You're listening to the Middlemen Podcast, this week with Tom Lemongello and Todd Sawicki. All right, so I've been waiting to interview GoPuff for pretty much the whole time we've been doing the podcast. This is an exciting one for me.
Well, and for you, which is weird because
Yeah.
you've been pitching GoPuff to me, and I've been like, another convenience store type model, even though they're like the digital online only version of that. But I was like,
Yep.
how cool could they be? And boy,
But I mean,
I could not have been more wrong. This was a really interesting conversation, and I think there's a lot that retailers can take away from listening to the GoPuff story and RMN offering.
yeah, I mean, to me, Michael Peroutka over there and his small but mighty ads team is doing the kind of really the cool, connected to the big idea TV commercial types of campaigns that I've never seen retailers really jump into.
Well, and what's interesting to that point is when we talk about retailers being publishers or acting like publishers, a lot of this story, Michael's story at GoPuff, is really that. Like, he is executing campaigns and selling campaigns. I felt like I was talking to my old sales team at I Can Ask Cheeseburger, where you work with brand agencies, you get RFPs, and in those RFPs, they always ask for, give me your big idea, which are non-scalable custom executions. Like when you see a takeover the New York Times homepage, New York Times ad sales team put that together. Like they took sort of the brand assets and custom created the New York Times. And so,
Right.
to our discussion around this, those aren't really, they're not scalable executions, right? They're only unique to that one publisher, in this case, RMN in GoPuff. But the ability to execute on really cool brand campaigns, and what they're really good at doing is kind of taking these big brand campaign ideas and bringing them to life in ways that I'm like, wow, that's really cool and unique. And like, I wish I was Michael's boss and watching him execute, because he's doing a really good job selling to now their vendors, right? Their brands,
Yeah.
but
But
selling to
these
the
are
brand
forming.
teams at the brands. Like they're winning money and budgets from the non-shopper,
Yeah.
right? The real brand side, in a way I think everyone in the RMN space can learn from. Like Michael's a great North Star to, yes, retailers need to act like publishers and need to sell like publishers. And Michael's like, if you listen to his
Yeah.
story, he's doing it. He's killing it.
This is a masterclass, and I entreat you all to listen to the end because he has tons of examples, and we'll do our best. For those who are watching, you'll see some of those examples flash up on the screen. This was just a ton of fun to listen to.
If Michael is really doing, the Lord's work here, so you can win these brand campaigns. And if you bring your unique elements, and I think that's another thing. When you're a publisher, one of the things you're asked to do with these big ideas is, what's unique about you as a publisher, whether you're New York
Right.
Times or I Can Ask Cheeseburger or what have you.
Yep.
And as an RMN and as a retailer, I think you're going to have to ask the same thing. Like, what was unique about GoPuff? And Michael really
Yep.
pulls that out in terms of how he sold and is selling GoPuff to these
Yep.
brands. And I think you retailers can use that. And I think that's the homework for you as you listen to this episode, is go back and think about, what is unique about my retail experience, about
Right.
my audience, about my product, and use that to go win these big brand activations, these big brand dollars. And so I think those are right. Are you more in-store oriented? Are you more online oriented? Are you more
Yeah.
category
I mean,
specific?
it's. I'm happy that this is coming right on the heels of our Hy-Vee episode, where they weren't afraid to just blow it out for in-store. GoPuff isn't afraid to use its special capability of holding inventory. So these are all really good lessons for the retail media networks out there.
Tons of great lessons. Hy-Vee focusing on retail. Like, you can't, if you want to reach their markets, they're the best aspect. And GoPuff is, for their type of audience, really unique as well. And so there's a ton of fun stuff to learn from both of them. And Michael's he's got just so much to share from what he's up to. And he's very open. And so a great listen to anyone who's building an RMN.
All right. We are here with Michael Peroutka from GoPuff. Welcome to the Middlemen Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
This is one that I've wanted to do for a long time. GoPuff started in Philly. It was 2 Drexel students. My personal thought was that when I moved to Philly, it was very hard to buy beer, and that maybe that was the impetus. There could have been other substances that needed to be bought, but I mean, for me, it was a city where there was a lot of challenges because of the blue laws, but it blew up overnight and it had lots of different machinations. But what was so interesting about it for me was that they own the inventory, so it really was whatever you saw in there. It was a single delivery experience. So from my experience now to you being an expert and running the ads product there, tell us about GoPuff and what your offerings are.
It sounds great, and excited to chat today, guys. It's I'm coming up on my 5-year anniversary at GoPuff, and it's been a fantastic ride so far. I tell everybody it's been a lot of work, but I've also learned more than I have at any other job, and I've also had the most fun.
Now, has that whole 5 years been, to jump in, is that whole 5 years been retail media, or did it evolve into retail media from some other direction?
It has. No, I've always been a part of GoPuff Ads, which launched about 5 years ago. So I was one of the early employees within that org. I'm a digital media guy at heart. So GoPuff was actually my first foray into retail media. I come from the
Five
world
years ago is early. That's so 5 years puts you're practically OG in that regards.
It's true. I think I'm just a little jealous of the triad, retail media mafia out there, and everybody else that has been a part of it, for a decade plus. But I've learned from a lot of those people over the years. But my background was in the digital media space. Worked at big companies like Disney and AOL, smaller startups too. But kind of saw where the puck was going, with commerce media, with retail media, and decided to jump in here. But going back to the origin story of GoPuff, I don't want to say it was necessarily beer. I think the story is it was more, snacks and ice cream and soda that they were looking for. But a couple college students, Raf and Yak, who are still the founders and CEOs of the company today, kind of had this epiphany while at Drexel that the convenience store was not convenient. When they wanted something, at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, you couldn't find it in Philadelphia. And so they set out to build a better solution. And when you think, 13 years ago when GoPuff was started, the very hot business model at the time was something that was asset light. Think about the Airbnbs, the Instacarts, the Ubers of the world. Phenomenal technologies, companies we all use, but they essentially created marketplaces, connecting two different things. Raf and Yak, saw this and said, we do believe there's advantages of being vertically integrated. And we want to build a business that allows for vertical integration, meaning that everything from the ownership of the inventory to the delivery of the product sits within the pipes of GoPuff. And that vertical integration gives you a lot of distinct advantages of which, we can dive into. The problem with that business model, though, is that it is very capital intensive. We own or lease 400 plus buildings. We are sitting on, hundreds of millions of dollars or more of inventory at any given time. So throughout the years, we've had to raise capital, but we have built, the infrastructure for last mile delivery over this past decade plus within the business.
That world of delivery where, I don't know what the lead times were back then, if it was hours or minutes. Was it like 15 minutes? Because I think we're now in a situation where Amazon's trying to compete with you on that under sub 1 hour. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, we say we are delivered in as fast as 30 minutes. I believe our average delivery time over the network in Q1 was right at 29 minutes. Some markets, obviously, depending on your proximity to an MFC, and for those that are not in the know, MFC stands for Micro Fulfillment Center. It's what we call, our warehouses where we house our inventory. If you live 2 blocks away from that, obviously your deliveries might come quicker. If you are a bit farther away, it could take a few extra minutes. But each of our locations, only delivers to a set amount of zip codes and a radius outside of that. And that radius, for example, in Manhattan is going to be a bit smaller than, say, Dallas, Texas. And it's all based upon, population density, the roads, the travel time that we can get from point A, the warehouse, to that end consumer on the outside of that delivery zone. But to your question about Amazon, look, I think anytime that, Amazon decides to enter a business, it means that they're doing so with a massive amount of data and understanding and testing behind it that says that this is a business that is very poised for growth in the future. And so them entering, with Amazon now, to me, is just a testament to we are playing in a space that matters to consumers. Amazon is not going to take a bet on something if they did not fundamentally believe that this is the way consumer behavior is going. And we have seen that ourselves. I like to remind people all the time, 21 years ago, 2 things happened. YouTube launched and Amazon launched 2-day shipping. which is pretty wild. So you now have this entire generation, of post-college grads that have only ever known an on-demand economy. They never had to listen to the AOL dial-up modem sound that we all know. They never had to, wait to find their favorite song come on the radio and record it on a cassette like we did in the 90s. People all of a sudden aren't going to be like, you know what, I'll actually wait 3 days to get my favorite kind of soda. No, they're only going to want it faster and faster. So while Amazon has entered our space, we also see it just as a phenomenal stamp of validation. And we also know that we have a 13-year head start and that this is the core focus of our business. This is just not one other thing that we are doing. Every day, the entire organization wakes up and thinks about how we can deliver the best-in-class instant commerce experience to our consumers.
What's the story of retail media within GoPuff? Did it just start out with sponsored search and evolve? If you look at some of, quote unquote, the competitive space, the DoorDashes, they're in this space as well. Where does it evolve given the innovation out of the convenience category in general in terms of overall retail?
When we launched our business, we did it with partners. We did not have the expertise to think about ad serving, to think about relevancy modeling. So early, launch of GoPuff ads back in 2021 was with Citrus Ad, which then became Epsilon. And they were phenomenal partners. They were exactly what we needed, at that time of our organization. As we started to mature, as we started to understand the industry, our product, the relationship of ads with consumers, we decided to think about retail media slightly different. We wanted to take a lot more ownership over things like the product roadmap, the relevancy modeling that we did, the ad targeting that we allowed. Myself and many others within GoPuff Ads do actually come from more of the programmatic and digital media background. And we saw a lot of the things that happened in the digital and programmatic space, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, were going to start to happen within the retail media space. And one of those biggest things was the rise of audience-based buying. GoPuff Ads was very early when we decided to partner with Cody, our current ads platform partner, to say when we built out this platform, we want to enable strong audience-based targeting. We want the brands to decide who they get to reach. It's no longer just saying, here's Gatorade, and I'm going to put it in front of the Gatorade search term. That doesn't matter. Most likely that buyer is already buying Gatorade. So we actually believe we were fairly early on this kind of push towards incrementality because we allowed things like new to brand buying to happen multiple years ago. We launched, lapsed buying. Obviously, like anybody, we allow competitive conquesting within it. But rather from a contextual environment, we've always been thinking about it over the past couple of years from an audience-based perspective. Furthermore,
that's an interesting, well, I was going to say, to jump in on the audience based targeting, what's fascinating about that is it's direct movement away from quote unquote search and keyword buying, right? Which I think has dominated retail media buying to date. And one of the things that Tom and I have spoken a lot about is if we're really going to grow retail media, we have to look and feel like media buying. And what you're all talking about is with audience, that is absolutely media buying, but some interesting terms there, right? Conquesting is a traditional retail concept. Like Tom talks about this when he pulls up his JBP lingo. And so that's an interesting marriage of the two. And so your own background coming from the media space, as well as bringing that to a quote unquote retail-like business, and even more retail now that you guys own BevMo, I think that's an interesting way of how to think about this. And we have to be media first in the way we're building this business, not just contextual, not just search.
Well, I think
I love that. And just to quickly add on that, we were the first retailer to actually make our sponsored product inventory available via the trade desk. We want to reach.
Oh, interesting. That's fascinating.
Where media buyers are. So last year during Ad Week in New York, we announced in partnership with Cody and the Trade Desk that we were making inventory available there. Now, we just had a big debate internally about what we should call this media. Because if you call it a sponsored product placement, the buyers buying programmatically across the Trade Desk are going to be like, this isn't my remit. Even though they now have the ability to place a dollar at closer to the buy button than they ever have before for their brand. So we're debating internally, like, what is a fair name? Do we need to reinvent the wheel? But to your point, it's media, and it is media on a digital shelf, very close to the point of purchase that has closed loop attribution. Any programmatic national media buyer should want to test that out because it'll perform for them.
It's amazing how these organizational roles and divides still dominate our lives. Shopper media, trade media, programmatic media, and brand buying, and how they don't mix. Because the realities of to what you're talking about, as I can imagine you in your pitches, like this is the closest media to a buy button you can buy. You should be all over this. And programmatic buyers are usually direct response, right? Performance based buyers, this should be like no brainers. But these roles that people are stuck in are probably maddening to someone like yourself. Like, just it's great media, just buy it.
So I want to be early. We want to be early. We want to be the tip of the spear because we do believe things will change. One brand will raise their hand
For sure.
first. They will move on it, and then others will follow. But we want to be leading the charge from an innovation perspective, from a retailer side.
So I think what's great is when you get into some of the examples of things that you've done, you really get a feel for how it's not just keyword buying, but it really gets to some of the toughest things that you try to do in the trade world, some of the higher funnel things that happen in the media buying world. So I think one of the best examples that we talked about at Shop Talk was your Pepsi Challenge campaign and the fact that that was conquesting. So I was like, I didn't see it. Like, what happened? Did it not run? And then you explained how it worked. So can you tell us about the Pepsi Challenge that you revived after 50 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all this past Super Bowl, witnessed Pepsi's, aggressive marketing tactics. Putting the polar bear in the commercial spot, clearly they were poking the bear. I think we know which one. And there were a lot of extensions of that campaign, that they were pushing out all across both the digital and physical. One of those extensions that they approached us with was saying, hey, we really want to bring this concept of the Pepsi Challenge kits into consumers' home during Super Bowl weekend. Can you guys help us out with that? And one of the things I love about GoPuff, and going back to what we talked about earlier with our vertical integration, that vertical integration means that I have the ability to bring in anything as inventory. We started off being snacks, drinks, ice cream, alcohol. Then as our consumers, got older and we expanded, we added things like pet and baby. We then continue to add things like fresh grocery is a very big focus point of the company right now. Last year, we announced a partnership with Robinhood. And you're like, what are you guys doing with Robinhood? We are delivering cash for Robinhood Gold members.
Wow.
It was not on my 2025 bingo card, but they approached us and said, look, one of the challenges we have as a digital financial institution is cash liquidity for our users. Can you guys be that vehicle to deliver cash to people? And again, this vertical integration allows us to bring in anything, including cash, into our warehouses, market as inventory, and deliver it just like we would a Gatorade, a Coca-Cola, an Oreo, or something like that.
Well, and that's a real interesting kind of, going back to our roles. Traditionally, sampling comes out of shopper media. And, from a brand sampling standpoint, like product launch and media, it's a really interesting capability. Pitching to a brand team, you're Pepsi and you're launching a new thing and you want to get your product into the hands of people. It's an interesting dynamic. Like it's funny because I'm imagining, even going back to like back in the day, I was the CRO for Iconez Cheeseburger, right? The lolcats and what have you. And pet was a huge, obviously, category for us as a marketer. And we used to do live events in city so that people like Peroutka and Friskies could get sampling. And this is a real interesting dynamic of retail media of, hey, you should think of us more than just the ad next to the cart or ad next to the search. And the capabilities that I think exist in retail media are so much more diverse than what people understand. Like if I surveyed 100 brand buyers at agencies across the country, 99 out of 100 would never think that they could go to an RMN for in-person sampling.
Look, I tell my
right? But that's a cool capability. Like, I think it just speaks to the diversity. And what's fun and exciting about retail media is there's a lot more going on than I think people realize.
I tell my team all the time, my go-to-market sales team, that I want them fighting for dollars against Spotify and Disney and Vox Media and all of these traditional, digital media companies, because frankly, we have the same capabilities. I can do content as well as anybody else. I then can also do commerce, which not everybody can do. And so we can tie the two together. But yes, Todd, I'm going to circle back on what you were just talking about, because it is a huge product offering of GoPuff, both in various ways that you described it. But to bring it back to the Pepsi Challenge kits, they approached us and thought about how can they extend this campaign. And so we talked about a bunch of different ideas, and one of those was the fact that they were sitting on quite a few, of these Pepsi Challenge kits. And we were able to bring those in as inventory, just like we would, Pepsi 20 ounces or 2 liters or 12 packs or something, mark them as non-sellable. But then obviously they want to go after their biggest competitor. When somebody added one of those SKUs or another soda SKU from that class to their cart, or was a lapsed Pepsi buyer over 6 months, we would deliver a Pepsi Challenge kit alongside the rest of their order at no cost. This gets shown to the consumer at the point of checkout. It is presented as being from the brand, not from GoPuff. We always want to make the brand the hero.
Right.
And then we're also able to do a few things. One is, if the brand is interested, we can follow up with them with a survey. And actually figure out, of the 50,000 people who receive something, what did they think about it? Did they actually do it? Did it meet their expectations? When we actually talk about a product, it's everything from the flavor to the size to the usage occasion. But then we can also start to look at, okay, what was the impact this had on your core business and your sales? Was this successful in conquesting and bringing more people into the brand? Did we see the new to brand rates, peak? And we can do this down to the user level. This is one of the beauties of being a digital only retailer, is that I have incredibly rich data that has 100% confidence that this user Tom is exactly what he has bought. These are his habits. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I am guilty of still using my same childhood phone number at some other companies, which I'm sure some of us might do as well, just because it's muscle memory. You walk into certain stores and you type in that same 10 digits as you've been doing for 30 years. But it also muddies the data. So I guess I should stop doing that, because being on this side of the table, want to support everybody in the industry.
Well, two things. One, you're technically not digital only anymore since you guys bought Bevmo.
True.
So those are not aware that, and I wasn't aware until we started talking about in prep for this call, that they had acquired Bevmo, which is cool, and curious to where that fits it in now. But what's fascinating to me is I can see you walking and getting the brand brief and responding to that, like the Pepsi challenge, and sort of the dynamics of, I'm like having flashbacks to my I Can Ask Cheeseburger days in terms of the brand pitches and so forth. And you sound just like a publishing media sales team. And I mean that in the best possible way. And I think that's the message that we've been talking a lot about over the last year and a half, is the rise of retailers as publishers. And one of the things that we were advocating is you retailers need to start and think and act like publishers. And the more you talk like a publisher, the more you're going to win these campaigns. And the Pepsi Challenge campaign, a great brand campaign, a very top of funnel campaign. And it's a cool example of, I think, the types of things that are happening in retail media beyond just what most people think of as, oh, it's just sponsored search. So kudos to you and what that sounds like. And again, if you're a brand buyer out in the world, this is your hopefully the light bulb's popping off of like, yes, I need to be sending out my RFPs to the GoPuffs of the world. Absolutely. In terms of the capabilities that you were just talking about. Also, let's talk about, Bevmo and what does that mean for you and your RMN strategy, and how does that evolve and impact that?
Yeah, Todd, I take a lot of pride to some of the non-endemic partnerships we've done over the past 12 months. FanDuel has partnered with us during the past 2 Super Bowls and NFL playoff season, where we brought their assets into our environment, and they've presented kind of the game day hub brought to you by FanDuel. We've done countless campaigns with Netflix and Hulu and CBS and NBC to push their new IP. I had this
awesome.
kind of
kudos to you guys.
Epiphany moment when I first walked in to GoPuff, and I give credit to my days, as a digital media guy working at a digital publisher, and saying, wait a minute, like, our busiest hours on the platform are 8 to 10 p.m. And Fridays and Saturdays. Our audience is comprised of 85% 18 to 34 year olds, and nobody GoPuffs and goes. When you order from GoPuff, you're basically indicating that you're staying home for the foreseeable future to get that delivery. And so I was like, well, who would want to reach somebody sitting on their couch waiting for a delivery on a Friday night at 8 p.m.? I was like, I think the entertainment and streamers might be somewhat interested in this audience. Yeah. We're one of the last places that they can engage with the consumer before they decide what to stream that night. And this was a narrative that we built. We had all the data and we took it to market with a lot of the agencies. And to credit to the agencies, they did kind of take a risk and lean in. It wasn't easy being like, I'm sure, putting GoPuff on a media plan for that first Netflix campaign that we did. But all the credit to the team at Media Hub, who was like, this does make a ton of sense for us. And then over time, we've just gotten cooler and cooler with the types of activations that we've done. A ton of stuff around IP and creating things that get dropped in the delivery bags. It's been a really fun vertical to work on. And when you think about Bevmo, I've had that idea too. We've included Bevmo in pitches of saying, like, look, we can do tied around entertainment releases, activations, end caps, just as, a CPG brand would do, but within our Bevmo experience. We have 161 of these brick and mortar locations that are getting tens of thousands, of people coming into on a daily basis. It's a lot of audience and at scale when you put it all together. And so we're thinking about this in-store shopping experience. One thing that we care a ton about, and I know every retailer does, is how do you balance those two things of, creating something that provides value for all three parties. It can't just provide value for GoPuff. It can't just provide value for the consumer or just the brand. Really trying to triangulate and say, okay, this is a solution that is creating a better shopping experience. We talk about our sponsored product inventory actually has a higher CTR than our organic product tiles. And all the credit in the world goes towards my data science team. They have built that best-in-class relevancy model to actually understand, to say, okay, here is the ad placement that we should be putting in this experience at this time. So we think about that a lot with every single product. It's not just did the ad perform. We are looking at all these other guardrail metrics to understand, okay, what was this impact on the overall basket? Did this consumer continue to come back and purchase at the same rate or a higher rate after introducing a new ad product? We are a retailer first and foremost, but we do realize that advertising can be additive to the consumer and the core business.
Well, I think especially when you're talking about entertainment, it's something that is additive because it's what people want to see. You can go non-endemic and go very far away from the consumer experience. But I do want to keep going a little bit on, the Bevmo opportunity. This is potentially under monetized assets. So if we think about sponsored search, that's the thing you probably filled up first. And so as you look toward, new surfaces and new things to do, you talked a little bit about sampling, and so you're sending product into the home, and that's interesting. Talk a little bit about how you look at in-store and that strategy, how that fills out your capability.
Totally. It's we're in the process, right now of getting ready to, fully head to market with in-store capabilities. While we do a massive amount of digital sampling, I actually think there is a huge opportunity for in-store sampling as well. It's somewhat more cost prohibitive because you actually need labor to do that, which is one of the benefits, and you don't know everything about that consumer, but can almost be an extension of our sampling solution if somebody wants to go into that. One of the reasons I love our digital sampling is that I actually know exactly who is getting this product, why they're getting it, because they reach a certain qualified audience that the brand wants to go after, able to remarket them and retarget them with a targeted incentive offer to buy that first purchase. And then again, figure out how do I get them to be a multi-repeat buyer. It's very different than just going to a music festival and handing out cans of an energy drink and hoping that somebody repurchase it. I think Red Bull has proven over the years that does work, but I also think that you can be incredibly, incredibly tactical when it comes to digital sampling. But when we think, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the other parts of this that's super interesting, and I think the reason for your fit with entertainment is that you really have a lock on much younger consumers, and I think that's probably by virtue of the fact that you were app first. But I'd love for you to talk about how you think about how media works when you have the app, you have the sampling, you have in-store, you have all these things working together. I think of it as this sort of like discovery commerce loop. And the one thing we haven't talked about is the social part. And so like TikTok and Instagram Reels and things like how does that fit into your system?
I think today I can drive more value for brands, helping them build their brand loyalty and preference for the next decade plus with this younger generation than I can for immediate sales. I'm very transparent in the conversations I have with our sales partner. It is tough for me to do anything that is going to impact their earnings this quarter or next quarter. Let's
Right.
just be realists. I think Walmart and Amazon are the two retailers that actually have the power to do that. But what I can do is I can help protect them for the next decade plus to come. Because when we think about our audience, as you alluded to, they are younger. Our average shopper is 26 to 27 years old. I mentioned 85% of our audience, falls under that 35 demographic. These are consumers, and we all went through this. They're the consumers that are starting to decide their brand preference. We all went through that era in our 20s where we decided, do I fly Delta or United? Do I have a Visa or MasterCard? Do I drink Coke or Pepsi? Do I order Grey Goose or Kettle in my, vodka soda? And those preferences, once they get formed, they are very tough to change. Now, what's really interesting is that how those brand preferences are getting formed is actually changing. And this is a lot of the research that we've done. I actually come from the world of psychology. I was a psych major in college, and I really, appreciate this understanding of, brand loyalty as we know it and how it gets formed is happening very different with Gen Z than past generations. There's this expectation of a two-way relationship between brands and consumers. It's no longer just, I'm going to buy the brand that has the best commercial or that I see the most frequently. There are so many other factors that goes into what is building this brand relationship. I was on stage at the National Confectionery Association earlier this year at their State of the Industry retail panel. And it was, all the largest players in the candy space. And Sally Lyons was moderating the panel. It was myself and some other merchandisers, and they were talking about value. How are merchandisers thinking about, showing value to consumers? And they talked about, discounts and promos and everything else. And I kind of stopped and took the conversation in a different direction. I said, consumers now want value more than just monetarily. There is a big opportunity, I think, in this space for brands specifically to say, hey, I want to reward my top 1% of buyers. I told the audience, and I'll tell everybody, in this podcast, think about what the airline industry has done. I think they have best-in-class loyalty programs. If you think about, what Delta does with varying statuses, I spend more money with Delta because they give me additional perks as I do that. And there's such an interesting opportunity for brands to start to do that, especially within the digital space. If a brand is launching innovation, why not let your top 1% of buyers over the past 12 months be the first people to try that? Imagine if there was a little, handwritten note in that as well, thanking them for their loyalty. Not everybody's going to share it or post about it, but I can guarantee you will see an ROI from that.
So I think that's super interesting because, I come from the world. I mean, the company I was at, Quotient, was coupons.com. And so all retail media was all about promotion. It was about lowering the price of the product on the shelf. You're talking about a real rewards or loyalty program that basically benefits those who use the program more. And I wonder if that's also helpful in terms of bringing this to higher funnel or bringing it to the channels that have been challenging for the retailers to get at, like TV and other places like that. Because when it's very focused on lowering the cost of things, it's about getting people to do buy rate, buy the same thing more often. Yours seems to be more, hey, let's buy this thing you've never bought. And, so do you agree with that, or?
I do. As I mentioned earlier, I want to be known as a brand building platform. And when I think about it, think about who has the strongest understanding, of consumers and who is buying and how they're buying. It's going to be retailers. So sure, if you want to call it retail media, so be it. But at the end of the day, our goal is that any good media, I believe, can both build your brand while also moving units. And I do believe there are very few, companies that can actually do both of those things and do it well. And I think we are one of those. We talk about services, Todd. You mentioned, Bevmo. One of my white whales, and I'll put this out here because, I want somebody to help me out here, is, we have our delivery bags. Again, this vertical integration means that every single GoPuff order comes in the same delivery bag. That is a completely new surface that we have not played around with. We have played around.
Amazon, going back to them, has certainly done a lot doing, branding their boxes. You're right. No, that's again, traditionally that would be shopper marketing. And really what you're trying to say is, hey, whatever you want to call that, it's media. And there's this opportunity to place an ad on the bag and sponsor it. Like, it makes a ton of sense. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, this is the canvas that what you're saying is within GoPuff, your canvas and your purview is across the organization. there is no limit to what a brand can work with you on. I think that's a really interesting story because we've certainly worked with and talked with lots of RMN teams who are like, yeah, we got this box and we
Yep.
can't go out of it. We can't touch an end cap because that's shopper. Whereas what you're saying is, look, no, we are the brand partner across the organization for you brand advertisers, you brand marketers. And to your point of like, hey guys, this is great. Like, you want to sponsor the bag, we can do that. And I think that's cool. Like, that's the type of stuff that, I think RMN leaders should be pushing on. And it's imagine a white bag instead of a white whale, but it's kind of a fun thing to think about.
And
But how do you do this? Because you have a small team, don't you?
We do have a very small team, but simultaneously, I've spent a lot of time, evangelizing what this can do for the broader organization. Our head of merchandising, I talk to, if not on a hourly basis, on a daily basis. We are in constant contact, together. We truly understand that, look, at the end of the day, we want to move more units, and my merchandising team understands that advertising is one of the best ways to move more units. They all want to have their category grow the most. Advertising can help them do that. Consumers have a fixed amount of money in their wallet. And so different departments need to grow their share by sometimes cannibalizing other departments. We are growing our AOV, but simultaneously, they realize that advertising is huge. Our marketing team, look, anytime we run an ad offsite, that supports our marketing team. Partnering with them. We've taken a lot of what we are building also from an ads perspective and for our partners and saying, hey, let's make sure that all of our internal teams are utilizing these tools as well. So we have a best in class. But we have to also make sure that the organization understands what advertising can do for everybody. It's not competitive. We never want to just steal dollars, trade dollars, and then call them ads. That's not the goal of my organization. Our goal is to find incremental ways to move more units for my merchandisers through other funding sources, while simultaneously also building brands.
How do you think about the opportunities, Bevmo and in store? And how do the merchandisers think about that in terms of, looking at the store as a canvas? It sounds interesting. You guys have a very collaborative relationship because a lot of times in store becomes that's the merchandises team, real estate, don't touch it. Whereas it sounds more collaborative with you all.
We think about that again across every single surface. So if it is a CRM, if it is a homepage banner, we always think about this as shared inventory across both our advertising partners, our company initiatives, our merch initiatives, whatever it might be. I did not approach our leader, of our retail business and say, hey, I want to put in screens that are just going to, blast 30-second ads and not bring you any value. It said, hey, I have the ability to bring in an ecosystem, partner with somebody who will help us from the CapEx perspective, give your merchandising team inventory to push the things that they want to push within the retail environment, while simultaneously also providing some opportunities for our brand partners that are interested to tell their story as well to our consumers. And so when you approach it that way to say, look, this is the benefit to my merchandising org, to my retail org that I'm going to give you, it makes the conversations a lot smoother starting from there.
And then, it sounds like you're doing things in all different parts of the RMN stack or, within the potential monetizable universe. What are your goals? Like, and I was a quotient, the whole goal was to get at 1% of, the sales for each of the brands. Are you beyond that?
We are. And Todd, you mentioned something earlier about how it seems like you guys do a little bit of everything. All of my partners, when I meet them the first time, I let them know that nothing makes me happier than getting that email that says, I know this is crazy, but ...
It's more fun, honestly, to sell those programs. We sold a giant cheese statue as an example at one of these events, like the Friskies, brand cat. And it was a fun event. And that's the type of stuff where when you get those emails or your team brings them to your attention, this is the stuff that makes your job fun.
I mean, I had 3 Super Bowl advertisers work deeply with GoPuff to extend their activations. I don't know if there's another retailer that frankly did that. We had the Pepsi Challenge Kits. We had EOS. They launched a new product. Their Super Bowl spot was around their new body mist. And the campaign was, smells so good you want to eat it, I believe. And so with that, they created cakes that look just like the bottle. If you're a fan of Netflix, is this cake? They leaned into that trend. And
That's awesome.
They worked with a custom baker, small quantity run of it, but we brought those in as inventory that people were able to purchase during the Super Bowl, aligned with their spot. And then the biggest activation of all was the work we did with Mars Wrigley and Skittles, where we actually partnered with them to deliver a live commercial featuring Elijah Wood to one GoPuff customer on Super Bowl Sunday.
That's awesome.
With a box truck wrapped as a GoPuff bag, Elijah Wood, live production, live stream.
That's awesome.
That's some serious
This is
targeting.
fun. This is like, honestly, this is some of the more innovative brand they are brand ads, but this is the type of stuff that I wish there was more of in retail media. Your story is interesting because this isn't happening enough. And this is cool. Like Elijah Wood on a GoPuff truck is awesome. That's amazing.
And it is doing very well during the award season. I saw it just picked up a couple Clios.
That's awesome.
Huge testament to that team. I mean, they obviously took, a leap of faith of doing something different and then asked us if we felt like we could help partner with them on this. But then the halo impact of what we saw just for the brand, it is massive. They have step changed, what that brand now does on a daily basis post activation because of all of the brand love that they drove.
That's awesome.
During that moment.
Great case study.
Tom, to your question, we come in significantly higher than that. It's because of our ability to tap into dollars outside of just the traditional e-com sales dollars. Now, our ability to do these brand deals, the non-endemic stuff that we partner on, this sampling that we've partnered on. We have built a very wide and deep product offering. And so, we are in that 3 to 4%, of where we are.
That's amazing. Congrats. That's awesome. To your point, but it speaks to the point of non-endemics, to brand. These are the campaigns and activations. When I was going back to Cheeseburger, you get RFP is always like, bring your big ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
And publishers traditionally were, and the more outlandish the publishers, the easier it was to come up with these. But your ability to execute on these is hats off. This is awesome. These are great. And campaigns.
Todd, one of the things that have been my favorite work stream that we've been doing over the past couple of years is we have a division called Powered By. When you think about GoPuff and you think about our vertical integration, you could argue we are a tech company more so than a retailer. And so we've done a lot of work where we've actually said we're going to hand over our last mile logistics and allow anybody to use it. And we refer to this as Powered By. It's all built in partnership with Shopify. So brands that have a D2C presence that we also carry their product for, they could download a fulfillment app from the Shopify store. And when a consumer goes and checks out and puts in an address, if they're in a GoPuff delivery zone and we have that product currently in inventory, they will be shown an option to get it delivered in 30 minutes by GoPuff. And when you think about a beverage company that somebody might be ordering 24 cans from, we now just created an experience where the brand is actually making a lot more money because shipping 24 cans of a liquid is very expensive. The consumer just went from getting something in 3 to 5 days to getting it in 30 minutes. And then GoPuff obviously is the facilitator of all that. It is a win-win-win across the board. But with Powered By, what we've also done is realize that we've been able to take this whole concept. You talked about it when you were at your former company and doing a physical activation with Nestle, Purina. Those happen all the time. The problem is those have always happened in singular physical locations or maybe 2 or 3 markets. We now with Powered By over multiple times have been able to take these massive brand moments, but then create instant product experiences all throughout the country. The very first one we ever did was again with Mars Wrigley, and they approached us with this customer insight. What I love about all these campaigns is that they start with an insight. And the insight that Mars Wrigley had was that nothing is scarier on Halloween than running out of candy. Being the house that has to turn off the lights at 4 o'clock, hide inside when the trick-or-treaters come. And so they launched the M&M's Rescue Squad. And the concept was on Halloween, if you run out of candy, you can go to mnmsrescuesquad.com and get a free bag of candy delivered directly to your doorstep. GoPuff being the facilitator. Now, they could have just done a pop-up in Union Square, New York, but you're going to limit the amount of people that are going to get exposed.
No, it's a cool story, and it's fun to talk about these case studies, which are not what people perceive as traditional RMN case studies. and are really great brand case studies, regardless of whether you're an RMN or not. And that's what the unlock is for RMNs. Like your story is, trust me, every RMN leader we talk to would be like, yeah, that's what I want. How do I do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah,
In all
exactly.
fairness, congrats on building a really successful, getting to that percentage of sales that you referenced with regard to Tom is an amazing success story. So congrats.
I
Now,
appreciate
do
it.
you have time for one more? You want to tell us the Reese's bracket one?
Yeah, no, I can go two more if you guys want.
Do it.
Yeah, the Reese's bracket one was, a similar idea. We've run a handful of these just this year. We partnered with Premier Protein for New Year, New You. You could go to goget2026.com on January 5th. That campaign kicked off, and you could choose a free bottle of Premier Protein to get it delivered to you only between the hours of 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Because they were looking to change that customer habit to say, hey, in the morning, one of the best things you can have to start your day is this product. Hershey's approached us and said, look, they have this new campaign. I'm sure many people have seen it. It's everything happens for a reason, or for Reese's. That's their overarching campaign. The first iteration of that, and what a brilliant brand marketing, because they're going to have these multiple iterations. I'm like trying to figure out what is next. But their first one was that every bracket bust for a Reese's. And so what they wanted to do was to say, hey, if somebody has a busted bracket, which we all do, because Reese's is one of the official NCAA sponsors of March Madness, they could go to this website that we built out for them, completely branded as Reese's, and they could put in a promo code that they would get after submitting their bracket and get free Reese's delivered directly to them. One of my favorite ones, to throw one more at you guys, that we did last summer was with Ferrera. And this was for their launch of their Lemonhead Ropes, which was a new product innovation that they had coming out. And their whole campaign was around opening up, a bag of sunshine, making your day better. And so they had their ask was, could we only make these eligible for delivery if it was raining on that summer Friday? What they wanted to do was to say people might be kind of depressed
Cool idea.
on a rainy summer Friday. It's the summer, you want to get after it after work, rain's ruining it. They want to bring a bit of sunshine to you. And we actually did that. Our tech team and engineering team, total kudos to them, built an API that the site would actually change depending on your IP based upon your current weather. From an API feed. And so if you went to the site and it was sunny in Brooklyn, it would say, sorry, not eligible, the sun's already shining. If you were in Atlanta and it was raining that Friday, you would get a different site experience, allow you to get that free product delivered to you. Again, GoPuff in all these executions, we take a back seat. The brand is the hero. Our logo sometimes isn't even present on the site, but it's just leveraging our fulfillment and our technology to power these brand new brand and product experiences that, frankly, they get me so excited. I think it is a very exciting time in this space, and more partners are starting to raise their hand to do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining the Middlemen. Thanks for taking some extra time to give us those examples, because I think those are the best part of doing this show. And keep in touch.
Of course. No, really appreciate the time, guys. We'll talk soon.